Hey guys, welcome to Final Bell Sports, and I'm going to be doing another UFC video today. I'm actually going to be doing a top 5 list of the unluckiest fighters in UFC history. Now yes, this is going to be an opinion based video. However, what I would say is that I'm going to be trying to put some facts in the mix in order to support my opinions. I appreciate that everyone else may have different opinions to me, so if that's the case, please put your top 5 in the comment section so that I can see it and we can have a little discussion about it. So the criteria of this video really, so unlucky, how do you define unlucky? Well, what I'm basically using as my criteria is fighters who have had unfortunate circumstances which were out of their control essentially conspire against them. So circumstances where, because something out of their control has gone a certain way, it's meant that their career goes in a completely different trajectory. So that's what we're going to be looking at here. So guys, I really hope you enjoy this. Once again, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. But without further ado, I'm going to get into this list. Right, so the first one on our list, the 5th unluckiest fighter in UFC history, is Josh "The Punk" Thompson. Now Josh Thompson, after spending some time in the UFC early in his career, he went to Strikeforce and had a trilogy with Gilbert Melendez, ends up in the UFC in 2013, has the best debut you could ever imagine. Stops Nate Diaz via a head kick. Like, the referee pulled Josh Thompson off of Nate Diaz. That does not happen to Nate Diaz. So that's literally as good of a debut as you could have wanted. Now he was scheduled to face Anthony Pettis for the title at the end of that year. Now because of Pettis' injury-prone nature, that fight never went ahead. So that fight was cancelled. He ends up being matched up with Benson Henderson in the January of the following year, 2014. And in a very close fight, could have gone either way, a lot of people said. Josh Thompson completely dominated the grappling. Ben Henderson pretty much dominated the striking. But a lot of people believe Josh Thompson won that fight, but he didn't get the split decision. Thompson was then sidelined with an injury that would keep him out for 18 months. 18 months later, he faces Bobby Green in what would be another very close decision, and once again, Thompson ends up on the wrong end of it. After that, he gets matched up with Tony Ferguson, of all people, and that's just rotten luck in and of itself. So he gets matched up with Tony Ferguson, and then he gets cut from the UFC. So, in conclusion then, bearing in mind that Thompson was 34 when he entered the UFC, so he fights Nate Diaz, beats Nate Diaz. If he'd have got the chance to fight Pettis, and this is not to say that he would definitely have beaten Pettis, however, when you look at the way Pettis was subsequently beaten by pressure and wrestling, it's reasonable to say Thompson had the tools to implement that game plan. Whether he would have done, we don't know, but we didn't get the opportunity to find out. And the Benson Henderson decision, if he wins that decision, Benson Henderson at that time was still a top fighter. So Thompson comes out on the winning end of that decision, he's straight back into the mix, he's back into the top 5. Potentially he's going to get a title shot in his next fight. Rashad Evans. So Rashad Evans is our 4th unluckiest UFC fighter in history. So this may come as a bit of a surprise. He's been a former world champion, and he's also a UFC Hall of Famer. However, we do have to examine exactly what would have happened if certain circumstances in Rashad Evans' career had gone a bit differently. So to put this into context, Rashad was the UFC champion. He lost it on his first defence to Lyoto Machida. He then defeated Thiago Silva and Rampage Jackson. He was scheduled to face then champion Shogun Rua, but this fight kept being delayed due to Shogun's niggling injury problems. And a certain John Jones was competing at the UFC 126 card. Shogun versus Rashad was scheduled for UFC 128. It was announced after Jones's fight that Rashad had pulled out of the UFC 128 due to injury. So Rashad got a very bad knee injury and had to pull out of that fight, which meant that John Jones then took his place. The rest is history. I mean, if you look at what happened from then on in, John Jones takes that title from Rua like taking sweets from a baby. He took it easily, and he went on to dominate a bunch of the legends from that division at the time. So he dominated everyone that he faced. And in addition to that, Jon Jones and Rashad were teammates. So they both trained at Jackson's. Rashad, up to that point, had trained at Jackson's MMA for the majority of his career. He then suddenly had to leave because Jon Jones was the champion and Rashad wanted to challenge him for the title. And I'm not saying that Rashad would have ended up beating Jon Jones if he'd have become the champion. Far from it. But the situation could have been a lot different. It really could have been a hell of a lot different. Due to the fact that if Rashad wins against Shogun, he's then a two-time light heavyweight champion. So I think that puts him in sort of all-time great potential territory. And it may have been a little while longer before Jon Jones and Rashad Evans decided to split, because Jon Jones at that time had not beaten anyone in the top 5. He wasn't someone that was guaranteed a title shot. He got it on the chance that Rashad was injured. So if Rashad doesn't get injured, there's a good chance, again, if Rashad had beaten Shogun, there's a good chance Rashad would have had the opportunity to have another title reign and to get a couple of defences under his belt, as he wasn't able to do the first time. Number 3, Tony Ferguson. So Tony Ferguson, El Cucuy, there's so much you could say about him, but as far as him being one of the unluckiest fighters, again, he's had a very successful career. But let's just think about this fact for 1 second. The man is on a 12-fight win streak. It's unprecedented. He is on a 12-fight win streak, but he has never fought for a world title. Yes, he had the interim title. He beat Kevin Lee to win the interim title, but he has never fought for a world title. And let's examine exactly how that has happened. Tony was on a 6-fight win streak leading into 2015. His last opponent in that win streak was Josh Thompson. Now at this point he was scheduled to fight Khabib, and the winner of that fight was going to be the number 1 contender for the championship, which at that time was held by Rafael dos Anjos, a man who Ferguson would later go on to decisively beat. Ferguson then went on to win 3 more fights against Edson Barbosa, Lando Vannata and Rafael dos Anjos. Now at this point, him and Khabib was scheduled for the title. They were supposed to fight for, well, it was the interim title actually, so they were supposed to fight for the interim world title as Conor McGregor had gone on a hiatus of some sort. So they were supposed to fight for that. Khabib pulled out. Ferguson beats Kevin Lee for the interim title by submission. So after defeating Kevin Lee, Tony was once again scheduled to face Khabib in the March of that year. Now this would have been the 4th time that they were scheduled to fight each other. So he was putting his interim title on the line, but they were also saying that that fight was going to be for the real belt. So Tony versus Khabib for the real belt in March. March 2018 that is. And of course, as we know, Tony Ferguson ends up being pulled from that fight, which I can only describe as a freak injury. He tripped over a wire and tore his ACL. He tripped over a wire and basically blew his knee apart. Right? So what did the UFC do at that point? Instead of making Khabib versus Al Iaquinta or, whoever for an interim title, they make it for the real belt. So Khabib beats Al Iaquinta through a relatively comfortable unanimous decision and gets given the real belt, when Tony had the interim belt all along. So Tony Ferguson's interim belt was completely scrapped, completely forgotten about, and Khabib went on with the title. So Khabib's first defence was not against Tony Ferguson, it was against Conor McGregor, who at this point had not won a fight in 2 years. He'd come back from boxing against Floyd Mayweather. So they scheduled the fight between Khabib and Conor McGregor for October, UFC 229. This was October 2018. And at this point, they'd said that Ferguson was not fit to fight. Ferguson had had some mental issues around this time. Some mental health issues, I should say. So he had some mental health issues, and that resulted in the UFC saying that he was not fit to compete. However, Tony Ferguson ends up competing at the exact same event against Anthony Pettis, and absolutely murked Pettis whilst Khabib absolutely murked Conor. So that fight definitely should have happened at that event. I know that they wanted to hype up Conor versus Khabib as country versus country and whatever, but it should have been Khabib versus Tony. And now, in the last couple of months, as we've all been hearing about, so Tony wins against Pettis. He also won against Donald Cerrone. In this time, Dustin Poirier gets a shot at Khabib, which, why? And now it gets scheduled again, 2020. Scheduled for April 2020. But guess what? The coronavirus hits us. The coronavirus stops Khabib versus Tony from happening. It's just, this is the definition of unlucky. The man has got 12 wins on the spin, and he may never win a world title. He may never win a world title. Like, that would be absolutely outrageous, and even more so if we do not see Tony Ferguson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. They are the best two lightweights of all time. I don't care if Tony Ferguson hasn't won a real title. They are the best two lightweights of all time, and we may never see them fight due to all these unforeseen circumstances that I've mentioned. Number 2, this is going to surprise a lot of people. However, in my opinion, this guy could easily have been number 1. And this guy, of course, is Jacare Souza. So Jacare Souza comes into the UFC as a decorated Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artist. Additionally, he was the former Strikeforce champion, having lost that in a close decision, I would say, to Luke Rockhold. So he comes in, he beats Chris Camozzi, who I don't know why was really matched up with him. I think he was a replacement opponent. Then he beats Yushin Okami. He stops Yushin Okami. And many people may look at Okami's trajectory after that. However, at the time, Okami was still a top fighter. Still top 5 easily in the middleweight division. So if you think that Jacare could have had a title shot after that, a lot of other people, if they'd have got that win, potentially would have done. Jacare, of course, went on to win 5 fights in a row, and that included, yes, another win against Camozzi, not a particularly credible win. However, he also beat Francis Carmont and Gegard Mousasi, who has gone on to be very successful, as we've seen, in both the UFC and Bellator. So Jacare had great wins, and this is around the time of December 2015. Chris Weidman's the champion, right? Luke Rockhold gets a shot in December 2015. Bearing in mind that Luke Rockhold came into the UFC, he lost immediately to Vitor Belfort, then he got 3 wins against Tim Boetsch, Costas Philippou, and Lyoto Machida. Now, this is no disrespect to Luke Rockhold. At the time, he probably was the best in the division. But circumstantially, Jacare at the time had a 5-fight win streak, with names, as I've said, such as Okami, Carmont, and Mousasi included in that win streak. And it's fair to say that those wins were better, the win streak was better, and it was more as well. So really, he should have got the shot on merit. So this is the first thing that was very unfortunate that happened to Jacare Souza. In his next fight, Jacare fought Yoel Romero in what ended up being an extremely controversial split decision. So when I say controversial, Jacare definitely should have got it. So Yoel Romero rocks him in the first round, almost finishes him with a spinning back fist. Fair enough. Yoel definitely wins that round. The third round, well, Jacare definitely won that round because he took Yoel Romero down. Didn't do as much damage as he probably would have liked to have done, but that was the most significant factor in the round. He took him down and had some very decent control time. Now, the second round is what it all comes down to, really. So Yoel Romero probably did have slightly the better of it. However, there is one particular incident that I believe defines this fight. So, Yoel Romero was against the cage. Jacare is trying to take him down. Yoel Romero grabs the fence and then ends up on top of Jacare. The referee took a point away from Yoel Romero. So, how was that not... It seems to me as though that wasn't factored into the decision in order to give Romero the fight. So that would have been, that would have been a draw. What really should have happened is that if Romero doesn't cheat, then Jacare gets on top. So they should have took a point and they should have restarted the fight with Jacare on top of Romero. And that would have given Jacare probably, most likely, not definitely, but most likely enough control time to win that second round and then decisively win the fight. So this is the first of a few difficult decisions that Jacare has had to deal with. So Jacare then went on to sort of trade wins and losses for a couple of years. However, one of his losses was a split decision to Kelvin Gastelum. And again, this is not one that's really as debated, but it's still a split decision. It's still a fight that potentially one judge saw it his way. So that's pretty unlucky as well. And then you have to factor in the fact that he ended up in light heavyweight. So his most recent fight, he fought Jan Blachowicz. And Jan Blachowicz, so it was a 5-round fight, and I'm sure no one would disagree with the fact that it was a very boring, non-exciting affair. However, if you score rounds on a 10-9 a must system, on that basis, Jacare definitely won that fight. So Jacare didn't do very much. The first 3 rounds, though, he was trying to take Blachowicz down the whole time. Nothing was happening. Neither of them landed big shots on each other. And Jacare just had Blachowicz against the cage in the clinch for pretty much the entirety of the first 3 rounds, save a few breaks by the referee. But in the 4th and 5th round, Blachowicz outboxed Jacare and won those rounds quite comfortably. But that still doesn't mean that he wins the fight. This is where I think people get confused. Because it's supposed to be an exciting sport, and I understand that side of it, that it's supposed to be an exciting sport, and Blachowicz did far more to excite the fans than Jacare did. However, those 3 rounds, Jacare was, whilst he wasn't doing what he wanted, because he wasn't getting Blachowicz to the ground, he was in complete control of those rounds. It shouldn't matter if he gets the fight to the ground or not. He had Blachowicz against the fence, so he was on the offense for pretty much the whole of that first 15 minutes. So you have to wonder how he doesn't get that decision. And then you look at the position that Blachowicz is in now, and he's going to fight John Jones for the title. So in conclusion, I think Jacare has been extremely unlucky in his career. He could have had a couple of obvious world title opportunities, actually, in middleweight. He could have got a title shot in his first sort of 3 or 4 wins in the UFC. They could have given him one after that. He was quite highly hyped at the time. And then after he went on a 5-fight win streak, could easily have got a title shot at that point. They decided to give it to Rockhold instead. Then he gets screwed out of the title shot by that decision against Yoel Romero. Then when Rockhold versus Weidman 2 was supposed to happen, so Rockhold versus Weidman was supposed to have a rematch, Jacare was the first replacement opponent. Rockhold turned the fight down and wanted to fight Bisping instead. So I think that says all we need to say about Jacare's extremely unlucky UFC career. And the number 1 pick, drumroll please, is Damien Meyer. Now Damien Meyer, again, first 1 and 2, I had a real debate about this, but it had to be Damien Meyer for me. Now, a lot of people believe that the UFC had a grudge against Damien Meyer from his match against Anderson Silva in Abu Dhabi at UFC 112. Now, this was a really long time before the events that we're going to talk about, but I think it's true because the way this guy has been treated, the injustice that he's faced, it's honestly outrageous. Honestly outrageous. So let's go through his career. He obviously went to middleweight and wasn't successful at a title shot, fair enough. Then he moves down to welterweight. Moves down to welterweight to try and attack the new division. So he goes to that division, looks like an absolute beast in his first 3 fights. TKOs Don Hyun Kim from that judo throw, chokes out John Fitch, chokes out Rick Story. Sorry, the John Fitch was a decision, but he absolutely dominated him. Then he gets put in probably the worst stylistic matchup possible for him against Jake Shields. Loses a very tight split decision. Again, most people unanimously agree that Jake Shields won the fight, but it was still close enough for one judge to see it the other way. He then loses to Rory McDonald, which is fair enough. Rory was a top fighter at that time. And then enters the form of his career, I would say, and embarks on this win streak. So Meyer goes on a 5-fight winning streak, which culminates with choking out Matt Brown in May 2016. Bearing in mind that Tyron Woodley, so Meyer's on a 5-fight win streak. Tyron Woodley was on a 2-fight win streak. One of them was an extremely tight split decision, and then he has like 18 months off out of the octagon. He gets a title shot against Robbie Lawler, who I really liked Robbie Lawler. A lot of people like Robbie Lawler. However, you have to say that that looks like a very favourable matchup for Damien Meyer when we think about it. The form Meyer was in at the time, he was taking down anyone and everyone. It's difficult to see how he had a really good chance of beating Robbie Lawler. I'm not saying it's a definite slam dunk win for him, but it was a favourable matchup, I would say. So he didn't get that shot. Tyron Woodley then goes on to knock out Robbie Lawler. Then in August 2016, Damien Meyer chokes out Carlos Condit, who once again was still a perennial contender at that time, whilst he was never really the same after that fight. At the time, he was still reckoned extremely highly, but once again, they didn't give Damien Meyer a shot. They wanted to do Woodley versus Wonderboy, which resulted in 2, quite frankly, boring fights. Anyway, that's irrelevant. Damien Meyer, at this point, is on a 6-fight win streak, and they still decided to do the Woodley Wonderboy rematch when really Meyer was waiting for that shot. So he doesn't end up fighting until about 10 months later. So he doesn't fight until May 2017. And he had to take on Jorge Masvidal, who was a very difficult matchup for him, to be honest. And it did go to a split decision. And once again, Damien Meyer at this time was no spring chicken. He was 38 or 39. Every month that went by with him not getting a title shot was miles on the clock. So it really was very unjustified to do this to him at this stage in his career. So he beats Masvidal, and Dana White says to him, "You're finally getting your title shot." Oh, but there's a little bit of a catch, Damien. I know you've just fought, but I'm going to organise your next fight for only 6 weeks after that. So he literally fought in May, the middle of May, and then fights at the end of July. And he was only given 6 weeks notice to get that fight. And for someone like Damien Meyer, and he explained afterwards, and Damien Meyer's not a man to make excuses. He basically said that he liked to go to a different camp. So he trains in Brazil, but he likes to go to America for a few weeks beforehand to brush up on his wrestling. He wasn't able to do that for this fight, so Tyron Woodley absolutely wiped the floor with him. I say wiped the floor, it was a really boring fight, but Meyer just never had a chance. And I think, to be honest with you, I think he was too old by that point anyway. So I think this, whilst again, Damien Meyer will go into the Hall of Fame, but what I would say is that Damien Meyer does not care about money. Damien Meyer doesn't want to be rich. Damien Meyer doesn't want to be a star. Damien Meyer probably doesn't care about the Hall of Fame. Damien Meyer wanted to be a world champion. And due to these circumstances, and when I say circumstances, I just mean the UFC basically screwing him over and over and over again, he was not able to do that. And I do think that he deserves it. For me, he's probably the best fighter never to win a UFC title. So there we have it, guys. Damien Meyer is the number 1. So to recount the list, number 5 was Josh Thompson. Number 4 was Rashad Evans. Number 3 was Tony Ferguson. Number 2 was Jacare Souza. And number 1 was Damien Meyer. Guys, I really appreciate you watching this video. If you took the time to watch it, please leave a like, please share it on social media, please subscribe to the channel. Once again, guys, everyone's got an opinion, so this is just my opinion. I've tried to back it up with as many facts as I possibly can. But please, if you guys have a different opinion or a different order with the same fighters, please leave that in the comment section and we'll have a little discussion about it. Once again, thanks very much for watching. Peace.